Hi everyone, I'm Jo Fry and this is my channel, Jojo Fry Rocks, and in this video I want to explore a question. Does the story shape the song? So sometimes a song can hit harder, I think, if you know the backstory. How does knowing that backstory shape how it makes you feel about the song? Would it hit the same if you didn't know the story behind it? If you didn't know what the artist went through when they were writing it? Does the story around the song matter as much as the song itself? What are your favourite stories around how various songs were written? I started thinking about this in particular because two reasons really. So when I came back from seeing Jerry Cantrell playing live in London last week, I felt kind of inspired. You know, I did that cover of Down in a Hole to start my gig review video. And I also came up with a little bit of a riff of my own. And I started thinking about putting a song together and potentially getting some lyrics down. Because again, seeing Jerry's gig really just brought home what a fantastic and amazing genius songwriter he really is in terms of the music and the lyrics. And in particular, I was thinking about the song Rooster, and I think this is very relevant to this question around knowing the story, not just the context of when the song was written and how it was put together, but what inspired those particular lyrics and that particular song. And would it be as good, or would it mean as much if you didn't know all of that stuff? So for those of you who may not be familiar with the Alice in Chains song Rooster, it's a song that's all about Jerry Cantrell's father's experiences in the Vietnam War.
The term rooster had several meanings. It was the term that was given to Cantrell's father when he was a little kid because of his cocky attitude. And Cantrell's father would also be deployed to the Vietnam War twice and never talked about his experience to his son. According to WeAreTheMighty.com, Rooster was also a nickname for the M60 machine gunners because the muzzle flashes looked like a rooster's tail. It's also how the Vietnamese saw the 101st Airborne Division soldiers who wore screaming eagles on their sleeves. Because bald eagles aren't native to Vietnam, they would sometimes refer to the 101st Airborne soldiers as, and I quote, chicken men or roosters. Jerry Cantrell would tell the LA Times the impact that the Vietnam War had on his dad's life, saying, "Vietnam is something he never talks about. I asked him about it once and he said, 'That's dead, son, let it lie.' When I wrote it, I was getting this vibe thinking about him and what he's lived through. 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, he's been a prison guard. I was thinking about the things he might have thought and felt there." In a separate interview with Rolling Stone, Cantrell talked about his dad trying to transition back into civilian life after the war, saying, "My dad was trained to be an effing killer. After that, you can't just come home and say, okay, everything's cool, I'm going to work 9 to 5 now. That stuff scars you forever. We had a lot of problems and occurrences because of that." Those problems would lead to Cantrell's parents divorcing when he was a young child, and him living with his mother and grandmother in Tacoma, Washington. The guitarist would recall to Louder Sound, "He didn't walk out on us, we left him. It was an environment that wasn't good for anyone, so we took off to live with my grandmother in Washington, and that's where I went to school. I didn't have a lot of my father around, but I started to think about him a lot during that period," he'd say. Rather than resentment, Cantrell placed himself in the shoes of his father in Vietnam, and Rooster would be born. After writing the track, he would play the song for his father, asking him if the depiction of the war was accurate, to which his father responded, and I quote, "You got too close, you hit it on the head." Cantrell would reveal the song seemed to heal a rift that had been created between himself and his father during his childhood. While the song's central focus was on the Vietnam War, it would transcend the conflict and find a new audience with the wars that have been waged over the last 2 decades. Conflicts, much like Vietnam, saw soldiers fight an invisible enemy who doesn't wear a uniform and who blends in with the local population and has no rules of engagement. Cantrell would tell Louder Sound the impact that the song has had on this generation's veterans, saying, "I've been all around the world and I've talked to combat vets from Desert Storm and the recent war in Iraq. and they have a deep affinity with the song. I just recently got a letter from a guy in Iraq who told me that his unit had changed his call sign to Rooster. Obviously, it's unfortunate that these guys still have to fight for political ends, but it's cool that people connect with that song for it to be part of them getting through.
This, although it's not written from personal lived experience, seems to have touched upon something that really, really rings true with not just with Jerry's father himself, who has said that that does really kind of accurately portray a sense of what it was like, but it's sort of become adopted as an anthem by kind of US Vietnam veterans and actually kind of all veterans. It's become a really important song for them. And I think even before I knew, so, you know, it was only, I think, in the last year or so that I actually knew anything about the context behind the song. It's only through watching the Gibson Icons video on YouTube about Jerry Cantrell that I actually, found out why and how that song was written. I've always loved it, and I knew what it was about because it's all there on the page. It's all there in the lyrics. It paints an extremely vivid picture, and it's very, very clear to understand what it's actually about. And I think the genius of it is that it works on a universal level as well as being the experience of an individual and mentioning things by name, like Jerry's mother, Gloria, and actually mentioning the nickname of Jerry's father, which was the Rooster, or Rooster actually. That was just his kind of nickname that he always had. So you've got the universal experience that I think every human being can relate to, which is the general inhumanity of war. That's something that, as a human being, we all understand, and we can all kind of relate to our fears around that in particular, especially kind of now. It seems even more relevant than it ever has been as a kind of anti-war song. But making it specific to his father and that individual perspective, I think really gives it an emotional weight and depth that I think it wouldn't necessarily have if it was just a purely imagined narrative. And I feel anyway, that knowing about Jerry's background, his relationship with his father, which wasn't particularly great as he was growing up, knowing that the distance that experience created, you know, Jerry's father's experience in Vietnam sort of necessarily resulted in that kind of distance in their relationship in the early years. Knowing that later on, when Jerry wrote this song, it brought him closer with his father and started to kind of repair that relationship and strengthen it, just makes the song so poignant. And so I think for me, regarding that particular song, I would say I'm really pleased that I do know the story behind it, and it does give the song more meaning and more emotional depth and significance, at least to me anyway, as a massive fan of Jerry. So I would say yes in that respect. And I think sharing something that is personally very important to you, being able to be that vulnerable is is so brave. You know, you are taking a big risk, and it takes a lot, I think, to put that kind of thing out there and put yourself on the line like that. That's just even more reason to be in awe, I think, of someone's ability to do that. And I'm not sure that I've ever really been able to do that. I don't think I've ever been that brave. So that is something that I think, you know, you kind of need to explore and maybe push yourself to deal with if you are going to write a good song, I think. But I can see, you know, there's another side to the argument in which, you know, do you need to know the circumstances individually? Do you need to know anything about the artist that wrote the song, and know anything about what the song's about in order to enjoy it and take meaning from it? And essentially, if it's a good song, everything should be there. It should be complete. There shouldn't be anything else really that you need to know about in order to appreciate it. And I think that's kind of the same with most art, writing, you know, film. You shouldn't need to actually know any details about the people that made it in order to appreciate that piece of art for what it is. And for example, you know, one of my favourite songs ever is Lover You Should Have Come Over by Jeff Buckley. Now, I am a big fan of Jeff Buckley, but I don't know an awful lot about him other than obviously kind of the circumstances around his death, and it's all very tragic, and that's all kind of quite widely known, but none of that really plays into my appreciation of his songs. I didn't know really anything about his personal life. I've never tried to find it out. I've never looked it up. I don't know anything about his family, his relationships. I don't really know anything about the guy at all. However, Lover You Should Have Come Over is fairly self-explanatory. It's in every line of the song. I think you can find all the meaning that you need just within the music and lyrics and the way it's sung and the way it's delivered. I also think there's another layer or another aspect to this, which is the meaning that you yourself place upon a song and what that all means to you specifically. And I have a particular association with that Jeff Buckley song from a particular time in my life, a particular relationship, and what it meant to me at that time, I think is kind of more important to me when I listen to it or when I sing a version of it. I think that means a lot more to me than anything that I could ever find out about why Jeff Buckley wrote it, who it was about or for. I'm absolutely not interested really in that. I think because I've already developed this relationship with the song over a very, very long period of time, and that is now what it means to me. And of course, anyone who loves music will probably feel the same way about any number of songs. And I just know from kind of going on various, YouTube channels where I've watched stuff around like Alice in Chains, for example, so many of the comments say things like, I felt like this song was about me. Oh, I felt like you wrote this song for me. I felt like you were speaking to me, about so many of their songs, and even going so far as to say this song or this album saved my life. Like, it literally saved my life. I was listening to this at a time where I was going through a very, very difficult time for whatever reason, and, you know, having some very, very dark thoughts, and this helped to carry me through that time, and I've come out the other side of it. And, you know, part of that is because of listening to this song or this album. And I think that that is so important in songwriting, for people to be able to have that connection, to give them that space and that degree of ambiguity, I suppose, in order to be able to sort of project their own feelings and situation onto a song. So in some ways it just needs to be able to do both of those things. It needs to be sort of universally relatable, but specific enough, I think, to be genuine and authentic, and that people can tell that this has come from a real place, from a real situation, and it has meaning and it has significance. But anyway, yeah, I just love the story around Rooster. I'm glad that I know that, and it does make the song feel more significant for me. But like I say, there are other songs where I don't know and I don't want to know. So I can kind of see both sides of it. But what I'm interested in is what you guys think of all of that, and how do you feel that knowing or not knowing the background to the song is actually important to you? Or, you know, are there some stories that you absolutely love around some of your favourite songs, and that you're really glad that you know that, and it really sort of enhances them for you? So yeah, these are some of the thoughts that I've been having around writing some of my own stuff, potentially. So it'd be good to get some views and let me know what you think. Okay, thanks everyone, see you next time.